What's up, Story Geeks? We are here for another episode of the Impactful Writing Podcast. As with me, as always, is Caleb Monroe. Caleb, how you doing?
Doing well. The UK has caught up to the US in daylight savings time. There's a 2-week difference. So my schedule has been chaos for the past 2 weeks, trying to coordinate things with people stateside, but it's a 1 hour off from the normal 8 hours off. And so today has been pretty low key.
That's good. That's cool. I actually thought at one point, hey, we had a daylight savings time change. I should ask Caleb about that. And I totally forgot. But here you are. You were on time, ready to go, even more on time than I was, actually. Today we are talking about rejection. As we talked about the how to pitch, it became obvious that part of that conversation is how to deal with rejection. If you're a writer, you're going to be dealing with a lot of different kinds of rejection. And you're going to be dealing with it over and over and over again. So because rejection is something that we take very personal, what are good ways of dealing with rejection, and what should we think about when we think about rejection? And I'm going to let you lead most of this show because you have way better notes than I have. So why don't you take it over? Where do you want us to go and navigate on this conversation about rejection?
Well, let's look at the biology of rejection, the good news of rejection, and acclimating to rejection.
I love it. Sounds great.
Which I like that description better than dealing with rejection,
Yeah.
Because you do acclimate. So with the biology of rejection, here's where I thought we could start.
Yeah.
Which is just what is happening. Why do we feel rejection so intensely, and why does it feel so personal and hurt so much?
Yeah. Right.
And so there's a lot going on in our biology as human beings that explain a lot of that experience. So part of it is that our brain has trouble distinguishing between ourself and a thing we've made. Our brain tends to think that things we've made are part of ourselves. You can really see this with people with their kids and things like that. But our brain gets confused in that way. It tends to include things we've made as part of ourselves. So then when something gets rejected, we take it personally because it feels like we are being rejected.
Right.
And then there's also just people fear the unknown. And if you're doing something new, it is by definition unknown. And so you're guaranteed rejection because you're doing something new. You're trying to put something new into the world. And, there's a biological reason for this. And that is that safety is usually based on knowing what's happening. And so when we don't know what's happening, we're less likely to be safe. We're in more danger, just from a very hunter-gatherer standpoint. And so fearing the unknown and feeling comfortable in the known we're wired for that. But when you try to create something new, you're crossing that boundary. And so most people are going to be wired against what you're doing. Right. And so that's going to guarantee rejection. There's a quote by someone named Chris Dixon. I'm not sure who that is, but I found this quote while I was looking around this week. If you aren't getting rejected on a daily basis, then your goals aren't ambitious enough. Ooh. And a version of that for the writer is if you're not getting rejected regularly, then what you're doing is not new enough.
Right.
It's stuff that people, So, I guess, but what I'm accidentally implying there is that means that when you do something that's not new, it all gets accepted, which is not a fact.
Not necessarily the case.
It just won't hurt as much.
Right.
What will happen when you don't do something is it's not even like a rejection. When you're doing things that aren't really well known, it's just sort of like blowing a bubble into a field. Like basically just no one cares or notices. Rejection actually involves interaction, but most people just don't care, notice, or interact with things that are that they've seen a million of.
Yeah.
And then finally, they've done fMRI studies that show that the part of our brain that gets activated by rejection is the physical pain pathways of our brain. So rejection piggybacks on physical pain neurologically, which is why rejection hurts so much on a nerve level, because our brain is responding to rejection in the way it responds to physical pain. So much so that a study has shown that taking Tylenol reduces the emotional pain of rejection.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. That's crazy.
So
Tylenol should be marketing to writers.
Yes. So doing something that decreases the amount of physical pain that you feel will also decrease the amount of rejection that you feel, because it uses the same nerves.
Yeah.
And again, the painfulness of rejection, again, has a base in our biology as hunter-gatherers. And that is that if you end up ostracized from your tribe, you die. And so rejection was basically, a lot of people think it was sort of developed as an early warning system. Your body is warning you, wait a minute, the tribe's not down with what you're doing right now. You need to roll it back because you need to stay here, because here is how you survive.
Interesting.
So it's a vital function. It's sort of this early warning system about being ostracized, which leads to death in a world where tribe is so important. And also, because all of that, and much like a physical wound, rejection also temporarily lowers your IQ. So
does it really?
Yes.
Interesting.
So you are less likely to
dumber.
be able. Yes, you're less likely to be able to reason your way out of what you're facing, because for the moment you're dumber. Yeah. And your brain hurts. and you're reacting like a wounded animal, and so rather than a rational animal.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring all of that up just to understand what we're working with on a biological level, and to know that this is not just like, oh, someone didn't like my story and I'm having trouble with that emotionally. There is really a lot of hardwiring in the human creature that makes rejection gives rejection such a powerful effect on us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just to piggyback off of what you said with some stories, not as many stories related to writing necessarily, but stories related to being in leadership over people dealing with rejection. So for example, I've had to lay people off as a leader, right? Like I've had to say, I'm sorry, but the organization can no longer support this position, right? And one of the things that I found very valuable in that process, and I say this because I think that this is worthwhile. I have actually utilized this as a producer, these insights as a producer of things, where I'm actually the one rejecting someone. And it was always related to how could I, as a leader, in a compelling way, showcase to the person that I was rejecting, that it was not a value judgment about them so much as it was a misalignment of fit. And I felt like when I was capable of doing that well, when I was capable of showing that it wasn't a rejection of them because of them not being good enough, but rather it was a misalignment of fit, it was a lot easier for the people to receive the rejection. And so I would try and do that like a lot if I knew that we were going to go through layoffs, or if I would start to paint a vision of what the future was. And so they could almost self-select out of it to a certain extent, because they could say like, oh yeah, that I'm not the ideal person to be involved in that particular vision. And I totally understand that this isn't aligned. I used, having had that experience in the kind of the corporate world, when we did our full cast audiobook, we were hiring lots of voice actors, voice performers. And so being on the other side of it presents you with a very interesting challenge for having to deal with the biological realities that you were just talking about. There's all these people that have submitted their auditions to us. These people are all super talented people. When you're on the other side of the coin, it's so much easier to understand. I think this is very applicable to writers. I know I'm talking about voice performers now, but it's very applicable to writers. When you're on the other side of the equation, it's so much easier to see like, well, this person isn't any more talented than that person. In fact, it might not even be a meritocracy. They might be more talented than the person I'm about to hire, but the person I'm about to hire actually sounds more like what we expected this character to sound like. It has nothing to do with talent. It has nothing to do with the value that person inherently holds as a human being, or even a meritocracy where the person has earned a lot and achieved a lot. It has nothing to do with those things. In fact, as a producer, sometimes you even have to think like, is this person bringing a different kind of value to the equation because their name is going to be popular, just their name, right? Like this is why Jake and Logan Paul, for those of you who don't know who that is, those are YouTube celebrities, social media influencers. The main reason they get hired for stuff is because they bring a name. They bring a bunch of people that are going to watch and view and purchase and whatever. And so sometimes you'll see people saying like, well, I have a small role in this film, and it ends up going to a social media influencer, not a person who's dedicated their lives to the art of acting. And you go like, well, why would they do that? Well, that's why, because at the end of the day, from a production standpoint, you need to get eyeballs on whatever you're doing, and these are some of the decisions that get made. So I think that most producers will not care about your biology. And most people running contests or people publishing books or people doing movies, they're not going to care about your biology. But I think the better ones hopefully will, and that they will help you process that on their side. But you can always tell yourself, look, it isn't about my value or my worth. It is actually far more about whether or not I was the right fit. And if I wasn't the right fit, you know what? That's probably okay. I'm going to keep moving. So that's just why I bring up my experience, because having seen that biological response in people and having realized that even I have had that biological response laid off in 2018. And I had to, as I deconstructed why that was happening, I had to go, you know what I was doing was actually really valuable. I understand that this is primarily a budget issue. Again, from a writer's standpoint, I understand that the producer or the publisher, whoever, cannot make this decision right now because they're looking for something else. Okay, that's fine. And then I think you can, once your IQ kicks back in, because you do get dumber, you can actually dissect what it is you're dealing with that's problematic. Are you dealing with anxiety because your life just changed significantly? Are you dealing with actually some anger at the way that it was done? Not necessarily that it was done, but the way in which it was done. That might be it too. So different things you can start to do if you are able to process the biological response, but also then reinterpret the biological response in a different way. Because I think a lot of relationships are really damaged, and sometimes that's actually what should happen if you're rejected by someone, because the way that they did it was just completely devoid of compassion and completely ridiculous. But sometimes those relationships get broken, and they shouldn't, because it wasn't really a personal thing. It wasn't really a devaluing or an unworthiness of the human. So anyways, I just throw that out there from some of my own experience dealing with the biological part of rejection.
Yes. Yeah. So then let's talk about the good news of rejection.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So here's the good news. If something is being rejected, that means you've made it and it's out in the world. So in that regard, rejections are progress. You have shipped. And when you ship, it's a numbers game. They will find homes. They will find readers. And the more you ship, the more likely that any of them will find homes or find readers. And it's a numbers game, but really the core good news of rejections means you made it and it's out in the world, which is what the job is.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Only that this was so a lot of my work experience I've translated into the writing world because of the similarities of it. And one of my work experiences, the job I was just laid off from, actually, I was teaching people, a lot of young people, how to pitch their startup companies. So there's so many similarities between pitching like to a publisher or to a production company and for a startup pitching to investors. It's just very similar because the end goal is the same thing. We want to partner together to do something, and am I the right fit to be able to do that with the investor versus the publisher or the production company or whatever. And one of the things that I would love your take on is that I've always felt like one of the most important things I can do for people who are putting their product out into the marketplace, whether that's a book, whether it's a movie, whether it's a new app, right? One of the best things I could do was redefine what failure meant, right? Like, so if what you just did that in what you were saying, like, hey, you said a rejection is not a failure. It just means you shipped your product. And even beyond that, what I would say is, I would say that a lot of times what I've learned is a rejection is valuable in two ways. The first way, people think it's a judgment call, and it can be helpful in a judgment call. Let's just say that, like, I send you something and you say, you know what, Jay, I really hate this, which is unlikely for you to say, right? But you would say something much more articulate and nice than that. But if you said that to me, I would go, oh, well, my first question should be, was I writing it for Caleb? Right? So Caleb hates it, but does that mean someone else would actually love it because Caleb hates it? Maybe. You know, I mean, like, there's entire industries built off this principle that, you know, if you're Republican, you'll love it. If you're Democrat, you'll hate it. And that's the entire industry is built on those kinds of pieces of content making money. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm just saying, so value judgments can be helpful, but rejection is really, really helpful when you're trying to find your audience. So there's two parts of rejection. There's one that says, like, hey, look, this is not good enough from someone you respect's opinion. There's also, this doesn't match what they would want to read, view, whatever. Those two things are not the same things. Like, you can't say, if someone said, now the really good people at giving feedback would tell you that. They would say, seems like the writing is really good and really well done, but this is really not my genre. It's not really my kind of thing. I don't really get into this thing. But the really bad people at this will just tell you, like, I thought it sucked, and they won't give any clarification. And won't give, and so I think that, that failure is the process of learning how to be better, learning how to find your target market and make something that they would actually really love and enjoy. And I think that if you redefine that in your head of, like, rejection and failure are not synonymous, but they're very similar. But if you look at rejection as learning, then how do I get better before I present to the next person or pitch to the next person or whatever? So, yeah, I think that's a good way, a really, really good way of looking at it. How have you defined failure, like, with your career?
You know, I'm going to talk about that a little more when we get to acclimating to rejection.
Okay, perfect.
Because I think that's like a key component of getting used to being rejected. But yes, I definitely have some thoughts on that.
Perfect.
But while we're talking about the good news of rejection, I also want to point this out, which is no one's going to remember something they didn't buy. You know, it's not like they're going to remember, like, oh yeah, back when I was reading 350 pilot scripts to try to find one staff writer, I remember that script 275 was awful. And if I ever see that person's name on it, no, they don't. They don't have no one cares. No one. It doesn't. If something gets rejected, it can feel like it's a stain on your record, or it's like a black mark against you. But you know what? No one remembers. Not only that, it's not personal at all. It's they need one thing. They have 350 choices. They've got to pick one, and it's not up. It's nothing personal against the 349 people that they don't choose. And the analogy I think of this is like when you go to a bookstore and you're browsing the shelves, you are rejecting every book you don't buy. You're just looking for that one that you like. You're like, okay, I'm going to buy this story. This looks good. But do you have any emotional feelings about all the ones you just passed up? No. You know, like you're looking for a specific thing this one hits the sweet spot, but you don't have any personal feelings and you're not going to remember the names of the hundreds of thousands of people who wrote books that you didn't buy that day.
Yeah.
And
that's a really good example.
That's literally the same. You're buying a story and you're passing over a bunch of stories. So in that regard, you are that person. And so just realize it's as personal to them in that as it is to you when you're buying a book in a bookstore.
And I will give one caveat to that. So I totally agree with you 100%. I have everybody who's auditioned for me that I've rejected. I would be like, I'd use this person again for a different project in a heartbeat. Like, right. Like that's even writers that have like written stuff for us. I would use this person. I didn't like this particular take or whatever, but like I would use this person again in a heartbeat. There's one caveat to that rule. And that is, now this is maybe different than some of the bigger producers that are out there that have learned to deal with these things. But if you are difficult to work with as a human being, not as a performer, not as a writer, has nothing to do with your talent, has nothing to do with your ability to do the job, any of those kind of things. If you are not a good human being in the process of us negotiating, I have run across two people. I won't name them because I don't do that unless you like really want to know and like you're doing a project and you're like, hey, who should I not work with? I'll tell you. But I've run across two people who treated the business side of things so poorly that I'm like, oh, I'm never going to work with you. Like, I don't care how famous you are. Like both these people were pretty famous. I go, I don't really care how famous you are. I would rather hire someone who's the crew that worked on Death of a Bounty Hunter. I would hire any of them again in a heartbeat. They all work super hard. They're all super nice people. I consider myself to be friends with all of them. They message me about other stuff that's not related to voice performing or producing or any of these things. They're cool people. I know a couple people that auditioned that I'm like, I don't care what kind of name you have. I don't care if I sell 10,000 more books. You're not getting hired by me because I don't want to work with you ever. And that was just them being. So as you talk about when it's just the work, nobody's going to remember the work, but they will remember your interactions. They will remember your person. They will remember you human. So,
but even that means you've gotten a yes. So just talking about like you at least have had one acceptance to get to the stage where you could ruin everything with your personality.
This is true. This is very true. Yeah, this is very true.
Don't ruin everything with your personality.
Right.
But even then, that's even just to get into that category, it'll be no's. Eventually there'll be a yes. And then you have the chance.
I think that there are a couple people out there though, that they, even when they have not had a yes, they get desperate and they get pushy and so the two people I'm talking about were not that. These two people, like, people would know. But I do think that there are some people who don't even have a name yet, but they have learned the incorrect way of behaving. I mean, like, you've seen them on, you watch your audition show, like American Idol, and you see some people like, this person's not even good at their thing. They're just a giant jerk. And now everyone knows they're a jerk. You know what I mean? Like, there's still those people that exist, and those people are probably sociopaths. So that if they listen to this podcast and they listen to me say that, they're probably gonna be like, "Well, that's not me. No, just carry on." But it's just my thing.
Well, and it's a self-correcting ecosystem. People that no one wants to work with don't tend to work very long. They tend to just sort of slide right out of the ecosystem. They'll be there for a little while, but if nobody is interested in spending time with them, they disappear. And we can all probably think of writers or actors or people who's just sort of disappeared, and we're like, what happened? And it's because they were a nightmare to work with, Yeah. So I will also say that they're also looking for something specific. So just like you were looking for a particular book that just like wets your whistle and hits what you're in the mood to read that day. Mm-hmm. They are looking for just something that hits that sweet spot. And they, sometimes they will make a note like, oh, this script is really good. Yeah. I'm not interested in making it, but I'll keep that person in mind. That happens all the time. And then I will also say that here's where form rejections actually have a use.
Oh, let's hear that.
Because most rejections are form rejections, where it's just sort of like some version of doesn't fit our personalities, or we've chosen not to buy this, or, like and it's just that every single person gets that exact same form email but the beauty of form rejections, because they're pretty much the same no matter who you're getting them from, it just helps you remember, not personal. It's as impersonal as it gets, and it helps you, like, after a while, form rejections, for me at least, the first few, it's like, ooh, but after a while you're like, I've got dozens of these, I've got hundreds of these, and they don't mean anything to me, because they're just it's just like receiving a confirmation email from Amazon. You don't read it. You see, when you just delete the confirmation, it's the same sort of thing. It doesn't, after a while, you just get used to it. And so, and it also, then it makes the personal rejections, which is usually they're doing that because they see something in your work.
Yeah.
It makes the personal rejections stand out. And so then again, something where someone has seen something in your work becomes something you can actually remember because it stands out. Yes. And all the others are just sort of white noise in the background.
Yeah, if you get a rejection that says something like, "This was fantastic, but not what we're looking for," that's a win. That's not a loss. That's a win. Mm-hmm. Like, that is great.
Or any small personal thing where they're just like, maybe try, and then they just give you another person to try sending the story to. Like, that's, that means they see something in it.
Yeah.
It's just not right for them or their publication. Or maybe it would have been right for their publication a month earlier, but they just bought a story that it works in the same story area as your story, and they can't put two of those in the same issue. So it's just got to be a no. There's so many things, and it has to do with word count. Like, I have 50,000 words for this anthology. I can fit this in. Yeah. It has to do with films, has to do with budget. I have this much money to spend, and I want to get as much movie as I can for that. But also, if it's more than that, I'm just saying no. If it's more than that budget, I'm just saying no. And it doesn't mean that anything that's said is bad. It just doesn't fit what's going on.
Yeah, that's really good. I couple things about that. I one time wrote a script for a short film contest, and I was really happy with the script. The people that had read it had really liked it and stuff. And it ended up getting second place in this contest. And the reason that it did not get first place was that it was impossible to make in any sort of low budget. It was like a short film that would have been like $1 million budget. And it was, and so I remember thinking, after I had written that, I remember thinking two things. One, I thought, well, I have to be more cognizant of the budget when I'm writing something. But two, I also have to write the stories that I want to write. In other words, just because I looked at all the other stories that were in the top 10, and it was like, oh, none of these are similar to what I just did. Like, none of them are even in the same ballpark. And that's what made me think to myself, like, also, yes, keep budget in mind, but also don't sacrifice your originality. Like, the only reason it got second place was because it wasn't like anything that else that was in there, right? So there's this idea of saying, well, let me learn what I'm best at. Let me learn what I'm what makes me stand out, but also I can adapt to the budget. So there's all these dichotomies in writing, because you go like, I need to think about that, but I don't need to think about it too much because I'm not that person, right? So it's one of those interesting kind of things. The other good thing, one more good thing about rejection, before we continue on to the next stage, and this is a principle that also applies to like startup and tech startups and things like that again. But you kind of were hinting at, like, keep writing, do as much as possible, get more rejections, right? Like, and there's actually a key mathematical reason for that. And it's not just mathematical, it is also both math and, for whatever reason, we call it luck, because we can't put a word to it. And the reality is of what you described, using slightly different word sets, is that you need to land on that one lucky thing. If you're good, then it's a matter of needing the luck to take hold, right? Maybe the person opened your story, your script, on a day when they were in a really good mood, And maybe the next week they open it when the day they're in a really bad mood. That's just luck. There's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you can control about that process. There's literally nothing you can control. And so when something is out of your control, the things that are in your control are making sure that the script is awesome, making sure that you're networking and getting to know people and putting yourself out there. After that, it's the luck quotient. And the luck quotient can be manipulated. It is not just purely an esoteric concept that cannot be manipulated. You can manipulate it, and that is by creating more things, making sure that your things are consistently good, because that gives you the math of it is the more of that you have out there, the greater the chance you will find the person on the day when they open your script and go, this is amazing. Right. So that's basically the luck.
Right. If you send someone 20 things over a couple of years, they have 20 opportunities to say yes.
Correct.
If you send them one thing, they have one opportunity. And if that's a no, that's a no. Exactly. But there's 20 chances they'll say yes if you send 20 things versus one. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a numbers game.
Yep.
But that actually leads perfectly into my last point about the good news of rejection. And that is that success only takes one yes. You don't need 5 yeses, 10 yeses. You can easily get 5 no's, 10 no's, but you only need one person to say, yeah.
Yeah.
And then suddenly your project has sold, or it's getting made, or it's getting published, and you've made it. And it just takes that one. So all you're trying to do is find one person who likes it at the right time for the right reasons. One of my favorite stories, and I think I may have mentioned this at some point in a past episode, but I couldn't remember what the context would be. But Dean Wesley Smith, who's a best-selling author, he's written over 100 novels and countless numbers of short stories. And he got his favorite rejection of all time. He got one from Asimov's Magazine, which is one of the big science fiction publishers. That said, "Dear Dean, sorry, we do not want to pioneer new roads into tastelessness." And that was the rejection. But
that's brutal.
But the very next month, he sold it to an awards anthology. So that just shows you like how different the reactions can be to the exact same thing. So all you're looking is for the person who really likes it. Doesn't matter if 100 people don't like it. In fact, whoever your favorite writer is, Google them and the word rejection, and you'll see that almost like all of them, their first novel got rejected 36 times or 49 times, or they've gone through every publisher and they had to wait till a new editor got hired at a publisher to try them again. And then that's when finally something happened. Yeah. Every writer has the story and those numbers. You can find it for anyone. It's, just whoever your favorite are, go look at what their stories are. But it happens to everyone. But it only takes the one yes.
Yeah. Not only that, but like, I think that you could argue that if you got a yes right off the bat, there's 2 issues that could come alongside early success. And that is, you don't actually build the tool set you need for sustaining that success. So in other words, you write one novel, that novel gets picked up by a giant publisher on the first try. What did you not learn? You didn't learn about the process of being rejected. You didn't learn about needing to create more and more things to put out into the world. You didn't learn those things. Chances are you can't replicate your first success. So one of the things that you need to do if you're building a career, I was just doing I have a series of videos coming out. One of them has already come out about, I'm calling it the best writers, but it's really just writers that have sold the most books. There's one on screenwriting, which is who has the most box office. And one of the things that you can recognize very quickly is that when you look at someone who is like a writer and a producer, like a James Cameron, well, that human being has learned this is how you do things. And if I repeat this process over and over and over again, this is when I win. That doesn't mean, do you think that James Cameron just woke up one day and was like, oh, I know how to do things? No, that is not it at all. It's a building on the last things. What did I learn about the last way of doing things that I could tweak slightly to do even better in the future? And of course, you're still going to mess that up in a while, right? Like Mortal Engines didn't do what the Lord of the Rings did. And so you're still going to have those areas where you don't. But if you are learning how to do it correctly, so in other words, what I'm saying is benefit of rejection is you learn some of the right things to be successful in the future. Whereas if you were to just get, published right off the bat, chosen right off the bat to buy your scripts, that could be negative. The other negative of that scenario is that a person purchased it or partnered with you to do it, and they weren't really that passionate about it. They just felt like it was good. That's also something I don't think you necessarily want. If you had to go through 300 rejections to get one person to say yes, that one person's likely going to be someone who's far more passionate about it. Just like what you described in the scenario with Asimov saying no, and then these other magazines saying yes. And remember, success, if you want long-term success, isn't just, and I'm preaching to the choir, I say remember, I apologize. We should all remember that you want a long-term sustainability. The yes is just the first step, right? So if you just get a yes because someone goes, oh, I think this is a really good writer, but they're not passionate about it, are they going to put in the work to help you with marketing? Are they going to put in the work to introduce you to the other people within their network you need to be introduced to? So having someone far more passionate about what you're doing is way better than having fewer rejections.
Yeah. But their checks cash the same. So, it also just part of it just sort of depends on what it means when they say yes at the time of saying yes. I got paid in advance to write my first screenplay, and the producers didn't sign my deal memo, so I never gave them the screenplay, but I had already been paid. So that thing didn't get made, but I sure got paid to write it, so So sometimes you will run into that situation as well. And to me, that was still a yes. And that script is what Drew read when he was looking for a co-writer for Mongolian Connection, which did get made, so.
Yeah. Well, to your point, that's you
two successes came out of that.
Yeah. And that's you rejecting them because you're basically saying you're not bringing to the table yes, you brought the money to the table. Fantastic. But you're not bringing to the table like the kind of things that I want to partner with someone on longer term as you look at the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. So that is, there are degrees of success. There are degrees of rejection. I mean, you get hired for the role. Fantastic. You don't get an Oscar. Okay. There's degrees in here. There's mm-hmm. not just the first thing is there's layers upon layers of choices people have.
And it's a sliding scale.
Yes.
So as you get to a point in your career where maybe you're selling 9 out of 10 stories, or 4 out of 5 scripts.
That's phenomenal, by the way.
But there's still going to be something that feels like rejection, and that's going to be, so maybe you're selling all your stories, but like you said, they're not winning any awards. Like they don't get recognized, or there's just so many ways. Or maybe you get bad reviews.
Beat up on social media.
You sell them all. You're getting paid for them. They're going out into the world. They have large audiences, but then maybe all the reviews are bad. That happens all the time to movies or bestsellers or whatever. And so it's a sliding scale. You'll never be out of the rejection zone.
That's a like key principle. You'll never be out of the rejection zone. Very true.
Which brings me to our final sort of area of talking about rejection, which is acclimating to rejection. And every writer, even the successful ones, you get more no's than yeses. That's just how it works, because you have people are looking like the example I gave earlier. A lot of people are looking to be a staff writer, but only so many people are hiring them. That's the way it goes. A lot of people are looking to sell a screenplay, but only so many people are looking to make them. A lot of whatever. So
math.
You will just get no's. You will get more no's than yeses. Mm-hmm. Just that's how it works mathematically. And so think of it this way: no is the environment that you live in, and you have to acclimate to that environment. You have to learn to live well there. Like if you move from something at sea level, if you move high into the mountains, at first your body is going to have trouble. There's not as much oxygen, the air is thinner. You're going to have problems with dehydration.
Yeah.
But if you live there for 5 years or 10 years, and hopefully your writing career is more than 5 or 10 years,
Yeah.
You'll get used to it. Your body will acclimate. And so that's really how you need to learn to, or how a good way, I think, to think about rejection is you live in the environment, the climate of no.
Yeah.
And your body has to get used to it. And you live there long enough, your body gets used to it. And then it doesn't have the effect on you that it used to have.
Right.
And an example would be, or another metaphor, I should say, or analogy. There was a time shortly after college, in the morning I worked, or before college, I don't know. In the morning I worked at a bagel bakery, and in the evening I waited tables. And the bagel bakery, you're baking bagels in a very hot oven, and it's 4 a.m. So your reflexes are not at their height.
Right.
And so basically every morning you burn your arm or your hand at some point in the process of baking bagels. And the first few times it really stings, but after a while it happens every day and you just don't notice anymore. It doesn't hurt the way it used to. You're just sort of like, yep, there it is. There's this morning's ding. And same thing at night. Waiting tables is so many times you're carrying out a plate where the plate is hot. And at first you've got to hold it with a towel or something. But after a while, you've carried so many hot plates, it doesn't bother you anymore. You can just pick it up with your bare hand, you carry it out there, and it's hot. And you have to warn the people because you know that their hands are not acclimated, but your hands are fine. Yeah. And, like early in our relationship, Erin she was sort of amazed at just the amount of hot dishes that I could just barehandedly grab and pull out of the microwave or whatever it was that made them really hot. But that was just because I had spent so many years doing that as a job. And now I've lost that. I don't still have it because I don't do it on a regular basis, Right. But again, like you just get, those are physical pains that I'm talking about acclimating to. But again, like we said, rejection uses the physical pain pathways of your brain. And so you will get used to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I think, it's a good example too, because it literally is like, it's something that's happening over and over and over again. This reminds me of this is a totally random reference, but it reminds me of, you ever see the show Hot Ones on YouTube?
No.
It's where what's his name? Sean Evans. Sean Evans interviews a celebrity of some sort. And they go from mild wings to hot wings with hotter, ever increasing sauce, right? With hot sauce on their wings. And one of the things that he has said, because everybody, when they're sitting across from him and he's not really reacting to it that much, and they're like, just feel like they're going to die. Everyone goes like, what is it with you, man? Like, have you just burned off all yours? And the thing that he says every single time is, no, I'm just used to what happens. And so I just write it. I have to write it out. Like, what else am I going to do? Like, it's the same every time. So it's not that even as you carry hot plates, it's not that they get any less hot. But so in other words, if you were like, I'm just going to be sensitive about hot plates, you might never, ever get over carrying carrying the hot plates. But just like with rejection, if you say, I'm going to accept it, it's still going to sting, of course, but I'm just going to accept it. You're not fighting against your natural biological response. You're just going along with it. And fighting it's going to take way longer to get over than you would if you just started to accept it. Right. So
and eventually it does stop stinging because your brain does filter out repetitive pain.
There you go. Yeah.
Because you can't, if you have a headache all day long, you can't be crippled. That's why you will do things, your attention will get distracted, you kind of forget your headache, then something will come and you're like, oh yeah, I've got a headache. Right. Your brain is like, filters things. And so it will sting less the more it happens. Another reason to ship as much as possible, get as many rejections as possible, because it will actually stop. You will get used to it and it will stop hurting. It will stop the physical, the neurological pathways in your brain that are feeling that pain will start reacting differently.
I have a good example. I have a really random good example of that. And this is not necessarily so much to do with rejection per se, but it's a version of it. And my wife and I were observing and commenting on the fact that in our generation, we still had a lot of real life verbal and physical abusing between kids, right? They'd make fun of you, they'd fat shame you, they'd do whatever. It was not something that they shied away from, the way that the modern day treats those same activities. The modern day is very much more sensitive to those activities, but we were commenting on the fact that and I'll give you an example of where we're not acclimated, but we're very acclimated to the concept of this bullying, right? Like, it's like, like it's just what you acclimate to. It's why people back in the day would have fist fights and it wouldn't turn into shootings, because it was like, well, we're acclimated to fist fights. Like, we do this to get our aggression out, and no, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it was. Now something that my wife and I are probably not acclimated to is like online bullying. Right. So there's a whole generation of people who are having to learn to acclimate to online bullying. So my whole point being with this is I'm not trying to talk about bullying and rejection, but what I'm saying is that those are examples of what you're talking about brought into the real world of saying, like, yeah, if you just acclimate yourself to it. And there's some things let's just face it, there's some things you should just never accept and you should never acclimate to. You should never have to work with a super abusive producer. But if a producer does say something along the lines of what Asimov said to that writer and says, then just acclimate to that. Just over time, acclimate to it. I think that's really good. I think it's a really good insight. I really like that.
Yeah. And so I keep track of my rejections, acceptances. I had 100 rejections last year in 2020.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't feel it anymore. I get them now, and I just take whatever it was that's been rejected and I put it back out in an email that same day, because it doesn't. Yeah, I've been doing it long enough that none of the, I'm so used to it. But the beginning of this journey for me, I started to learn to live in the environment of no. Was when I had this realization that I can create zero opportunities. I can't make there be someone out there who's looking to spend $50 million on a movie so that I can then go pitch the movie. I can't create the opportunities. I have zero control over any of that. And I also can't create any result. I can't make anyone buy it. I can't make anyone like it. It could be objectively the best thing ever written, but you can't make anyone actually want it, to want to read it or want to make it, Right. So I realized I have absolutely zero control over both opportunity and result. So my only role as a writer is to show up and be faithful in between. To be faithful with the opportunities in front of me, and then to not worry about the result, because that's not up to me. And that's, I think a lot of writers, their pain point is they believe they have control in one of those areas.
Sure.
I can make people like this, or I can create opportunity. I think that's where a lot of writers are feeling pain, is just because they are under the misapprehension that they can control a part of their life that is uncontrollable. And that's a very human thing. We do that all the time. We think we can control something that's utterly uncontrollable. COVID actually exposed just how much we think and feel like that. And
nowhere is that more apparent in the Western world. The Western world is even more that way because of all the industrialization that we've had and all of the things the luxury goods that we can build into our lives around us that make us think we're in control when we really aren't,
Yes. So if you're having a lot of pain from rejection, or you're feeling a lot of frustration in your writing, just take a diagnostic look and see if any of that is coming from an expectation you have that you can control opportunities or control results. And I think a lot of writers have that expectation. And we've talked in the past about having correct expectations is a huge part of just the emotional health of being a human, let alone a writer. But just check that. Maybe not. Maybe that's not the thing that you have an issue with. But I see a lot of people have an issue with that. So there's these domains. There's opportunities, there's faithfulness with opportunities, and then there's results. And only one of those domains you have any control over.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think you can separate out your learning process from your so in other words, what I'm trying to say is, I think you can improve your odds by doing a number of different things, right? We've talked extensively on this podcast about past shows, about getting a good writing group. I think it's really important to get people who you think would be in the audience for your thing, and learning from them how they react to your material. Those are two activities that are not, they have their own rejection associated with them. They're not rejection for the same kind of rejection you're talking about. So as you think about delineating between this is my learning versus this is my acceptance, business acceptance, partnership acceptance, those are two also different things. Different rejection is inherent in both of them. But I think that's really helpful too, because you may never learn from the business partners because they might not take the time to say, this is why we don't like this. But what you can learn is from your writing group and from the people you're trying to reach with your material. You can learn what they like or dislike about things. They can give you some of that information. Now, some of that's going to be rejection too. And some of it's going to maybe even hurt more because they're people you're very connected to as opposed to this big corporate entity. But I do think that those things are valuable too, but separating them is also valuable. In other words, if your entire audience says this is the best thing I've ever read and it just keeps getting rejected, it's helpful to separate the feeling, right? Like, hey, I'm still doing what I'm supposed to do. Even if it's not getting accepted, I'm still doing what I'm supposed to do. And that's kind of helpful as well.
Yeah. And we've talked also in the past about how the beauty of writing is that doing the job is also practicing the job.
Yeah.
Everything you write, you're practicing and learning and getting better. Even the things you're selling. It's not like you just have suddenly stopped learning. So doing the job of writing is the exact same thing as practicing the job of writing. It's it's writing words and telling stories, and you're going to get better at it the more you do. Even after you have broken in or sold things, you're still going to keep getting better. So the practice is the same as the execution. And that doesn't apply in a lot of fields, right? Yeah, soccer practice and a soccer game are very different activities, right. But with writing practice and writing the career are the same thing.
Yep.
And so one other thing that I don't know if this is a trick. I think it just sort of, again, I think this falls under just getting used to it. Living in the environment of no without it hurting, without passing out because the air's thin or you didn't drink enough, part of learning to live in that environment is that, for me at least, I realized, okay, no control over opportunities, no control over results, faithful in between is it. That's all I have. So that actually changed my definition of success because I realized that the end of the part that I have control over is writing something that I think is the best it can be and then sending it into the world. And sending it is the end. That is success. I've done it. I've made something and it's out there. I can't make anyone like it. I can't make anyone buy it, but it doesn't matter. I've already succeeded because my definition of success only falls within things I can actually do. Right. And all I can do is send it. That's the last thing I can do. And so that it just changed my entire relationship to what success and failure were. It brought all of it within the things I could control. If I didn't finish something or didn't ship it, that's failure. Unless I intentionally decided to because it was not working. Right. But if I finished it and shipped it, that was success. I succeeded. And so that made a huge difference. And so I started, this is the part where I said, I'm not quite sure if this is a trick, but what I started doing is just mentally telling myself, every time I put something out in the mail or the email, I said to myself, you know what? No one's going to buy that one, but that's okay. No one's going to want it, but I did my part.
You rejected yourself.
and so, yeah, I just start with the assumption that it's not going to sell. And part of why I can do that is because I have learned I live in this environment of no, where I got 100 no's last year. And I just realized the reality is I'm not a bad writer. I've made a full-time living doing it, but still, you still get all these no's. And so I send something out and I realized just statistically, it's more likely that no one will want it than that anyone will. So I just tell myself, I'm like, you know what? No one's going to want it. Yeah. And then any positive response at all is just bonus at that point. Yeah. It's no longer what I need to validate the project, because shipping was validating the project, and I just assumed no one wanted it. And so then if someone does, it's not quite a pleasant surprise, but it's just icing on the cake, because I already felt okay already about no one buying it. Right. So now I can feel even better than okay because someone is buying it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I think for me, I've been on the flip side of saying the trick that I've used is the one I mentioned earlier, which is redefining what failure means. Right. So failure is not the no. Failure is, why was there a no? And you don't always get answers to that, but that's why I like using writing groups, and both writing groups and audience feedback, because then I understand possibilities of why there was a no. If I wrote the story thinking that the general populace was going to like it, and the reality was, oh no, only people who like weird Westerns like this. Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't mean the story is a fail. What I've learned now is that the failing with the general audience means success with the audience that I'm actually attempting to reach in the more specific frame of things. So,
and a lot of times, even if you've tested it, we are the worst judge of our own work. So a lot of times you don't know who the actual audience is for your project. You know, you think you wrote a horror story, but everyone is like, you know what, this is a romance. I know writers where that's happened, and because you're the worst judge of your own work. So also know that you may be shooting for an audience. You may entirely miss that audience, but it doesn't mean your arrow is not going to land in a different audience.
Yeah, totally.
And that's also part of why you just got to ship it to as many people as possible, because again, you're not entirely sure what you've made or who your audience is. So let your audience decide who they are. You know, and that means you have to expose it to as many people as possible.
Which means that failure is a process of discovery, right? Like, so in other words, what we've already said on this show is that we have said that success is what you define it to be, for one thing. There are a limited number of ways to define it. Probably there's not you could say something. If you said to me something like, well, getting 100% rejections across the board for the perpetuity of my life is success, I'd be like, okay, that's really bizarre. I guess you could say that, but it would be very unconventional. So there are lots of definitions of what success could be. So choose the ones, like you have, choose the ones that are most meaningful to you, and then see failure as the process of learning how to achieve that thing that you wanted to achieve. And if failure is just the process of saying, okay, I've tried it 100 ways and those 100 ways didn't work, what's the 101st way that I can try? Having learned from 100 ways not to do it. And there are certain things that you can build in, like what you've said is, well, rejection is just part of the process. So if rejection is part of the process, then learning to deal with rejection is actually something that I need to do. So failing to learn to deal with rejection only means the ways you've tried to deal with it are not healthy and don't work. So what's the next way you're going to try? Yeah. In other words, stop repeating the same thing and try something different. I think that's really valuable.
Just like writing, practicing rejection is the same as getting rejected. You know, all those no's that you get on a story are no's. Yeah. But they're also you practicing getting better at living in this environment of no.
Yes.
Yes. It's both of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
Another, I think, important part of acclimating, and I actually think this is maybe where most writers go awry.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that's a big and ambitious statement. But you need to understand who you are and who you are not. Where do you end?
Yes.
Because like I said earlier, so much of the pain of rejection comes with us confusing something we've done with our identity. So it's often a case of mistaken or misplaced identity.
Yeah.
And we usually think that we have to accomplish something to have value. That's just a very human thing. And some of us are trained very much by that, by the way our childhoods work to do that, you know?
Yeah.
But so I'm just going to say this. I'm going to say this, and no matter who's listening to this, whether you're a writer or not, this is true. So take this to the bank. And that is that your value as a person has nothing to do with if or how much anyone likes anything that you write. And
double stamp, triple stamp that 100% agree.
Yes. And people attach their identity and their value to whether or not someone likes their work.
Yeah.
And part of that is biological. Your brain has trouble telling, but another part of it is just us deciding that's what validates us.
Yeah.
So you need to know who you are and who you're not. Like, where do you stop being you? You need to understand that. And this is where we've talked about it before, but this is where therapy is incredibly valuable. And also community is incredibly valuable. Having people around you who know you and love you, who can just say, that's, like, that has nothing to do with how much I like you, right? Like, my relationship with my wife has zero relationship to whether or not I sell anything in the world as a writer. You know what I mean? Like, and so that relationship reinforces constantly the truth that my value as a person has nothing to do with if or how much anyone likes anything that I sell. So if I say that this person has nothing to do with if or how much anyone likes anything that you write, and you feel a hitch or you want to object or that feels wrong to you, then you need to. This is where you need to work. This is where you need to do your work, is you need to separate yourself from your projects.
Well, and just where a lot of those rejections will most likely come from is a misunderstanding of what it is that you are saying, because there is truth to the fact that the world tends to gravitate towards meritocracy. Now, what you have to understand is that you need to separate what you have the ability to do as a human being from your inherent worth as a human being, right? So this is where these two things get and that's actually, they shouldn't be conflated, because what will happen is, could we take a list of writers and come up with a basic definition of which ones are more valuable to film production? Yeah, we could probably do that, right? Like, we could probably come up with a list and be like, well, this person earns more in the box office than this other person does, so that something's making them inherently more valuable for whatever reasons exist. But the conflation of the issue is to say that person is somehow a more valuable person than the person who's not selling anything, and that's where the two get conflated. And
it's only the work that's more valuable. It's not
exactly. Exactly right. And there's a separation of those. There's a separation of those two things that needs to happen for you as a human being to understand why. I'll use my wife as an example. My wife would probably care how well I do at writing and how successful I'm at writing, only because she knows that it has some meaning to me. But all of a sudden, I told my wife tomorrow, I'm not going to write anymore. I don't want to write anymore. She would love me the same as she did the day before. Like, to your point about so these things can't be really conflated. They need to be. She's making a joke and shaking her head at me because she's in the room, which is hilarious. But also, I know how this works. So I think that's a really, really good piece of advice. I mean, I think that I don't want to get too esoteric, and I don't want to apply this to situations that it doesn't belong in, because we are a writing podcast. But I've been tangentially aware of people who have, during this time of pandemic, even chosen to take their life, and I think that partially comes from a lack of being able. Because I think sometimes it's just that people aren't able. It's not that they are, it's not that they're trying to hurt other people, but they're not able to understand how much that activity would hurt other people around them. They can't understand that. And I think that this is one of those key things of like, you have to separate what you can do from your worthiness as a human being yourself. Because as you look at a pandemic and you go, the economy is failing and people are losing their jobs, and maybe I'm not as valuable as these other people. No. That's not it. That's not it. You are inherently a valuable human.
And you also have to understand that you're going to have more or less ability to do that than other people around you. Just like you're going to have more or less, like you're going to be either taller or shorter than people around you. Yes. There are just physical realities. I'm medicated for depression, and I chemically have less of ability. Like, there are parts of my life where I have trouble separating outcome from experience. Exactly. And it's not me making a choice to do it, and it's not me not understanding. In fact, I know, I'm like, there's no reason to be depressed. It doesn't matter. I still feel super depressed. Exactly. And so also, you just need to going back to what we said about expectations. Yep. And identity. Yeah. You need to know who you are, and you need to know what you can make a choice about, and what you need to learn to live with, and what you need to treat, because it's not a choice, and it's not something you have to learn to live with. Depression, anxiety are great examples of that.
Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic.
And so here's a few more sort of rejection related things. Okay. They're in the neighborhood of rejection. Okay. So first off is notes. Most writers, even a ways into their career, they experience someone giving them notes on their story as rejection of the story. It feels painful because, again, you have trouble. Your brain has trouble separating what you've made from who you are. So it feels like they're saying they don't like parts of you. Right. But what you have to understand and tell yourself is that the reason they're giving you notes is because they like it and they want it to be better. Yes. No one is giving you notes because they hate it, and they like, it's not rejection. It is acceptance. They're like, this is good. We think it can be better. Now, most of them are not writers, and so they will not necessarily have the solution. Yeah. But basically, they're in the arena trying to help. That's what notes are, is they're like, how can I help? Could we do this? Would this make it better? Like, we want this to be as good as possible because we like what it is. We want to make it. And so notes are not rejection. So that's an important thing to learn. Great. Another thing is don't pre-reject. Sometimes I'll write something and I'm displeased with the result. But my displeasure has more to do with what I thought it was going to be like in my head versus what it's like on the page. Yeah. But here's the thing, and this is called imposter syndrome, and psychiatric studies have shown that basically the more you know about a field, the less you feel satisfied with what you've done in that field. And so you feel like a fraud, because the more you understand what makes stories great, your understanding of what makes stories great will outstrip your ability to make them great. Your taste, your palate will always outstrip your skill. Skill takes longer to learn. Yeah. And also, you've been reading a lot longer than you've been writing, and you've been watching movies a lot longer than you've been writing, and you're still probably doing it more hours a day than you're doing the writing. Right. And so you're just so sometimes you're going to write something and not like it at all. But it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you are experiencing dissonance between what you wanted it to be and what it is.
Yeah.
But what I say to that is, don't pre-reject to the world and let them decide whether they like it or not. Don't go ahead and tell yourself no one likes it. Send it out in the world and let 50 people decide that for themselves. And the 51st they will like it. You know, like don't think that you know what you've made or how anyone is going to react to it. So don't pre-reject. Again, we talked about how success is just shipping. So put it out into the world and you have succeeded. And then let other people decide if anything's going to happen with it or not. Let them decide. Don't ever decide for yourself about that. If it's finished and ready to go. And then finally.
Can I offer one?
Yes, go ahead.
Before you move on? I think more and more things about imposter syndrome all the time. And it occurs to me that I feel like there's a lot of cultural things associated with imposter syndrome that have people are almost talking about it as if it's like a ubiquitous feeling we're having. It's not ubiquitous. There's a lot of people who haven't it yet, so they don't feel like they're an imposter at all. But I think that the reason why some people do imposter syndrome is I think that society is valuing more and more the concept of a hot take. I know that there's a lot of people that value podcasts 3 hours or like an hour and 15 and you've gone on for it. But I think that is, if you talk to someone for 1 hour and 15, you will realize that they have doubts and not sure. And there is issues in their life that they're dealing with. It's when you have the hot takes and the social media and all these, that's where imposter syndrome, I think, can really set in, because you're going like, man, I just made a lot of claims on whatever show I was on that were not nuanced and they were not well thought out. And they were just, these are what's getting me attention. This is what's bringing me fame. Well, how do you feel imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
It's not enough nuance in it for you to, so that's, I think that society is encouraging us to be more extremists when we really be more thought-provoking people who really dig into things instead of just being an extremist. And I think the other thing too is that the earlier comment you made about conflating what you do as being valuable versus who you are as being valuable. Guess what? You can't have imposter syndrome if you know that you're valuable. You only have imposter syndrome when you go, why are people? So this goes back to what I talked about. I'm just connecting multiple points of station here about the luck quotient. You might have imposter syndrome because you got lucky and you go, man, I got lucky, but I know 10 writers. So for example, if all of a sudden, this is not going to happen ever, but if someone handed me an Oscar statue, I go, I don't think I should have this. I think Caleb would deserve it more than I would. That's what I would say right to you right now. Right now, but the thing is there's a luck quotient. There is a luck quotient. And so part of that is if you think that the luck quotient is because you are amazing, you've made a mistake and you're setting yourself up for a very disastrous rejection journey. But if you think that the luck quotient, if you how do I want to say this? The antithesis of that is that imposter syndrome would say, well, I got lucky. Now I feel like an imposter. And I think in this case, I would say something along the lines of just accept luck for what it is and keep moving. Like just accept luck for what it is and keep moving. So anyways, those are just my comments.
And if you struggle with that, maybe chance is a better word. Because that's an actual statistical word. You have your chances get better if you do certain things, which means the likelihood that something's going to happen. And so chance is something that you can create, and you give yourself every chance by putting as much as you can out into the world as often as possible. That increases your chances. That's when, that's what so you can also think of it as chance and realize that there is luck makes it feel like something. Sometimes I think people define that as something that happens to them. Yeah. But chance is something you do that just that eventually leads to something that is experienced or feels like luck.
Really quick example. Someone will win an Oscar this year that probably would not have if it wasn't for the pandemic. Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
There were some people that got extra chances that were completely out of their control. So anyways.
And so, and just so you know, where we get the term you, I mean, everyone, I'm not saying you specifically, Jay, because I think we may have talked about this before, but where we get the term imposter syndrome actually helps make it clear what it is. And it was a study of college students. And the college students who knew how much they didn't know about a subject were the ones who got the best grades, but they felt like they weren't doing well because they understood how they didn't know.
Yes.
The college students who thought they knew everything, in reality knew nothing. And so they were super confident. They're like, I got this. Like, I'm all over it. Yeah. But they got worse grades. So so your work doing better is probably going to be tied to the fact that you also understand how little you know about being good at it. How little you know about being a good writer is one of the factors that will make you a better writer. Yeah. But it will also create this gap inside of you where you feel worse, even though in reality you are better than the people who feel good about it because they just don't know what's happening, right?
Right. So, that's awesome. I love that.
And so my final thought, and I'm just going to, this is probably evident because we've been talking about it throughout, but the reason rejection hurts is because it's tied to the survival parts of our brain. Like, pain is meant to stop you from doing something that could kill you. Certain behaviors your brain wants to stop you from doing them so you don't get ostracized because that can kill you. Like going in, experiencing something new that you don't know how it's going to go, that can kill you. And so like like all of this is tied to survival instinct. Yeah. And so I'm just going to say it out loud. Being a bad writer will not kill you. Or being a good writer who just gets a lot of rejections, not going to kill you. Your brain wants to tell you this is going to kill you. Like you are not going to survive this. That's what your brain is saying, but nothing is going to happen to you. Nothing. Like you could write 100 stories, send them out into the world, and maybe they are the 100 worst stories ever written by a human being. Nothing's going to happen to you any worse than what's going to happen to someone else, who sends out one story. It's really good. Like, nothing can happen to you from writing. Like the worst, like this is the worst thing is someone's like, like, and they're not going to remember it. And that is the absolute worst thing that can happen. So your brain and your body will try to tell you, this might kill me. Like this is a matter of survival, but it's not. Yeah. Absolutely nothing can happen to you if you don't sell a story or if people don't like it. Like it just can't, So just going to say that, just to be clear.
Well, and that, a lot of times when we used to talk on the Story Geeks podcast, when we would dig deeper into a movie, sometimes it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time with those trigger points for yourself because it is biology. But there can also be biology can and should, in my opinion, lead you to thoughts about spirituality. If perfect love casts out fear, then what is it that you're fearful of that could actually even cause you to be unloving in that process? Right? Like that's a completely different way of thinking about it. Because if you suck yourself into a fear mode, you're trying to be self-protective. It's really hard to be loving when you're self-protective. But if you were to say to me like, hey, you're just going to get rejected, like you said, like you got rejected 100 times last year, you kept track of it. It's all, if that turned out for you to be a more bitter, a more aggressive writer, and it didn't transform you in a good way, there's probably a really good chance that you're living into your fear response as opposed to the adaptation to the fear response of saying, I do fear this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I have a greater goal, which is hopefully being loving to other people, right? Whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think when you do find these things in yourself, sometimes a spiritual reflection is really valuable. I can't get on a plane without having an anxiety response because I was in an emergency landing when I was in my preteens. And sometimes I have to think to myself, like, when you're on this plane, stop for a minute because you are feeling super fearful. But is this fear going to cause you to be less friendly to another person or act like a jerk to another person? And the reality is I have to, what's the actual thing I'm fearing? The actual thing I'm fearing is dying. If I fear dying, what does that say about what I believe about dying? That's now something I think that the reason I think bringing up these things is really valuable and then reflecting on them is valuable is it can reveal things about the way you're thinking that could really be like, oh, the way I'm thinking about this, it doesn't mean that the anxiety is going to stop. I just described the way that my anxiety is not going to stop. I'm going to have a chemical in my brain, the way that you described a chemical in your brain with depression, that every time I get on a plane, my body is responding to it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anything else. I could research how safe planes are a billion years over, but I'm going to be terrified, right? Like, and my body's going to have a biological response to it. But if you can take that biological response and turn it into a spiritual journey for yourself, I think that's really cool. So use your writing as a spiritual journey. There you go.
Yeah. And going back to what I was just saying, nothing's going to happen. Your fear is going to, you're scared of something that you think is going to hurt or kill you. Writing can't do that.
Yeah.
Putting a script or a story into an email and getting back an email that says pass can't hurt or kill you. Yeah. It can't do it. So you can use that when you're experiencing fear. You can say, okay, I'm scared of it, but I have to remember it can't do the thing I'm scared of.
Yeah, totally. Well, that was a really powerful discussion. I've got to head to other meetings. Thank you, Caleb, for spending that time and prepping all of those thoughts. Those thoughts were amazing. Caleb did a lot of prep, and I did not. I hardly did any prep. So you're probably listening to me going, "What is Jay talking about?" But Caleb has great things to say, and he's valuable even if he didn't have good things to say. By the way,
yes, exactly.
By the way, you can support the show by doing a couple things. You can go to deathofabountyhunter.com and purchase Death of a Bounty Hunter. That helps out the show because it actually helps out the Reclamation Society. Reclamation Society earns that money. That's a book. Full cast audiobook that I wrote. You can also support the show by going to calebmonroe.com. He's got a lot of cool stuff over on his website. He'll let you know about his new projects that are coming up as well. And you can check out the Mongolian Connection that he co-wrote. And if you want to hear about that process, you can listen to the video on this channel where we talk to Drew. What's Drew's last name?
Thomas.
Drew Thomas. Yeah. You know what? I thought it was like a type of a first name because I'm like, I feel like it's a first name. I don't know. Drew Thomas. Go check out Drew Thomas. It was really fun to talk to him. The other support the show is that you can actually become a supporter of the show via Patreon. So go over to storygeeks.com. You can support the show that way as well. Caleb, any other thoughts before we clear?
No. I'm glad that you did not reject this idea for an episode, Jay.
Yeah, me too. This was a great episode. This was a phenomenal episode, and I appreciated the almost hour and a half we spent on it. So go check him out at calebmonroe.com. Check out thestorygeeks.com, and we'll see you on the next Impactful Writing podcast. Listen live every other Monday. Most every other Monday. Sometimes we have to cancel. I had to cancel it last time. Or listen on the Story Geeks podcast on your preferred podcast provider. Caleb and I will see you guys in a couple weeks. Bye.
Bye.